friends. How is everyone doing? Glad to see a few of you in here. I did not realize we have another friend that is live right now, or I would have done it at a different time, but that is all right. So, yeah, we've got this one we're going to go over and give away today. Can you all hear me okay? Just want to make sure with the microphone a little further away from me than usual. Also, before we get started, I have something super cool to show y'all. Thank you, Jelly. I got more fan art, friends. Look at the dollar sign, the gold chain around the wig. I love it. And hey, Fluffy, no, you're just in time. Just started like 2 minutes ago. So yeah, if you've seen Trip the Light Fantastic in the comments, she made the doll. And then these felted Coda, Little Johnny, and Dave. Aren't they so cute? Each one is different. I just love it. I'm so grateful. This is so sweet. So I'm starting a little shelf up here for fan art. Aren't those so cool? I love them so much. Oh, and before we get started on our royal book, I want to show you guys. Now, this one I probably won't give away for a while because I want to really take time to study it. It's so massive. But for, oh, right, Jelly, needed deer. For anyone that watched my video on the art thieves, Jerry and Rita Alter stole the de Kooning. This is Jerry's confessional fiction book. And it is weird, y'all. We'll have some lives going over it for sure. It is crazy. Crazy. But yeah, this one I thought would be interesting because while on one hand it's not really light, some of these stories are really horrifying, but they're all so far back. These people have been gone for ages. You know, it's not like we're hearing about current suffering. So yeah, I went through and bookmarked the ones I wanted to go over. In my opinion, these are some of the ones that I chose to go over here are some of the most interesting ones in my opinion, but also some of the really interesting ones I chose not to go over here on YouTube because YouTube would not like the subject matter. Okay, so the first one that I've got marked here is about Catherine the Great, the Russian queen. It's called From Love with Russia. Oh, right, Fluffy, yeah. Yeah, the royals back in the old time make today's scandals look tame. Okay, it says, turn my microphone. Catherine the Great loved horses. She also loved sex. Contrary to popular legend, however, she never managed to unite the two passions. Still, the autocratic Empress of Russia brought all the enthusiasm of a vigorous ride to her extremely busy bedroom. After ridding herself of her imbecile husband, Peter III, in 1762, Catherine grabbed the Russian crown and came to dominate her kingdom for the next 34 years. Boldly indulging herself as she grew more secure in her position, the Empress consumed handsome young lovers with an appetite that sometimes shocked her contemporaries. "She's no woman," exclaimed one. "She's a siren." Hey, Marcel. Yeah, definitely, Fluffy. The Empress relished her weakness for men, abandoning herself to giddy romanticism that belied her cold and pragmatic rule. She loved being entertained, even into old age, by a succession of well formed young men eager to please her. "It is my misfortune that my heart cannot be content even for 1 hour without love," she wrote. Sharing the Empress's bed brought ample rewards, not least of which was getting an intimate proximity to power when there wasn't easy. A good body and pleasant face combined whenever possible with wit and intelligence were merely starters. Oh, thank you so much, Marcel. I appreciate that. Hey, Kung Fu. Yeah, thank you. Aren't they awesome? And just to remind y'all, anyone who wants to be entered into the drawing for this book that I'll do after I end the live stream, just say in the chat, "I want to be included in the drawing." And then afterwards, I go through the chat replay and pull out every username and put them in one of those wheel spin apps. So just Just know, obviously, if you want to be in the drawing, you'll need to be comfortable giving me your address. So, whatever you decide on that is cool, but I hope whoever's interested gets in the drawing. Absolutely, Fluffy. We got you. Hey, Ruth. Okay, back to Catherine. The applicants were often supplied by the Empress's one-eyed ex-lover, a man that many assumed to be her secret husband, Gregory Potemkin. She had fallen in love with this rough, hulking officer relatively early in her industrious sexual career, be overcome by his brass courage, quick wit, and almost primitive actuality. Wasting little time disposing of Alexander, her boyfriend at the time, Catherine was delighted the first night Potemkin came to her bedroom, naked under his nightshirt and ready for action. I have parted from a certain excellent but very boring citizen, the Empress wrote to a confidant who has been replaced, I know not how, by one of his greatest, oldest, oddest, most amusing and original personalities of this iron age. Because of his long, greasy hair and brutish, unwashed body, many women found Potemkin repulsive. Catherine, however, reveled in his strength, charm, and actual domination. She couldn't get enough of this strange man who made her forget her royal dignity. When they parted, even for a few hours, she regaled him with an avalanche of feverish love notes, each peppered with at least one of her special pet names: my marble beauty, my darling pet, my dearest doll, my golden cock. Lion of the jungle, my professional bonbon. In one letter, she pretended to be in shock at the intensity of her passion and tried to get a hold of herself. I have issued very strict orders to my whole body, down to the smallest hair on my head, not to show you the least sign of love. I have locked my love inside my heart and bolted it 10 times. It is suffocating there. It is constrained, and I fear it may explode. In other letters, she gloried in his good company. Darling, what comical stories you told me yesterday. I cannot stop laughing when I think of them. We spend 4 hours together without a shadow of boredom, and it is always with reluctance that I leave you. My dearest pigeon, I love you so much. You're handsome, intelligent, and amusing. And then she sends him some dirty messages. She says, my head is like that of a cat in heat. I will be a woman of fire for you, as so often as you say, but I shall try to hide my flames. Oh, man. Moody and temperamental, subject to bouts of black depression and fits of jealousy, Potemkin was sometimes lovingly scolded by his royal mistress. There is a woman in the world who loves you and who has a right to a tender word from you. Imbecile, Tartar, Cossack, infidel, Muscovite, morbleu. The relationship was so physically intimate that Catherine did not hesitate to share even the most unflattering of ailments with him. I have some diarrhea today, but apart from that, I am well, my adored one. Do not be distressed because of my diarrhea. It cleans out the intestines. She wrote that to Potemkin. Says there is no surviving evidence to support the rumor that Catherine secretly married Potemkin, although she often referred to him in her letters as my beloved spouse or my dearest husband. Married or not, the relationship certainly transcended the bedroom as it evolved into a close political partnership. Catherine shared her vast kingdom with Potemkin as if he was her king. She consulted with him on all affairs of the state, working closely with him on her ambitious plans to expand Russia's borders and crush the Muslim Turks. The Empress's powerful lover is perhaps best remembered for the legendary Potemkin villages he is said to have created for her benefit when she embarked on a grand tour of all the newly Russianized lands he had conquered for her. These villages, it was said, were little more than elaborate stage sets of prosperous towns populated by cheerful serfs, all of which were quickly collapsed and set up again at the next stop on Catherine's carefully plotted itinerary. Ooh, he was gaslighting her. The artificiality of the Potemkin villages came to represent, in the minds of many, Catherine's superficial and half-hearted attempts at reform and liberalize her kingdom. Hey, Into the Weeds, awesome. Good to see ya. She's traveling right now. Though the relationship with Potemkin endured until his death in 1791, the sexual intensity between them dimmed far after only a few years. No longer champion of the Empress boudoir, Potemkin resolved to retain her favor by pimping his replacements. He handpicked a steady succession of new lovers for his erstwhile mistress, all of whom paid him a handsome brokerage fee for the privilege of servicing her. Oh, he was very Ghislaine. Says after being installed in the official apartment set aside for Catherine's lovers, each new favorite was feted and adored by the passionate monarch with almost girlish enthusiasm, but each in turn was eventually dismissed, either for boring Catherine or for breaking her heart. Few, however, left her service without a handsome settlement. When Zavodovsky was dismissed in 1776, for example, the French charge d'affaires in Russia wrote that he has received from Her Majesty 50,000 rubles, a pension of 5,000, and 4,000 peasants in Ukraine, where they are worth a great deal. It says serfs at the time were tradable commodities like cattle. So he's saying slaves. You must agree, my friend, that's not a bad line of work to be in there, is what the French dude wrote. Wow. I didn't know they made the Ukrainian slaves in 1776. We learn all kinds of things with royal gossip. It says one ex-lover, Count Stanislaus Augustus Poniatowski, was even given the crown of Poland, although Catherine did eventually hack away huge chunks of his kingdom and absorb them into her own. All told, the generous payments to fallen lovers amounted to billions of dollars in today's currency. When her friend, the French philosopher Voltaire, gently chided Catherine for inconsistency in her love affairs, she responded that she was, on the contrary, absolutely faithful. To whom? She said, to beauty, of course. Beauty alone attracts me. Yeah, she found a way of making it consistent in her mind. Okay. The next one I've got here is about the Medicis. They were wild. There's been a few Netflix dramatized shows about them lately. It says Francis I was a true Renaissance monarch, warrior, grand patron of the arts, and skirt chaser extraordinaire. This was a king who loved the ladies, lots and lots of ladies. A court without women is a year without spring, and a spring without roses, the promiscuous French ruler once remarked. Unfortunately, in his enthusiasm for plucking as many roses as possible, Francis gave his long suffering queen a scorching case of syphilis. His son and heir, Henry II, was also a passionate adulterer. Rather than sexually transmitted disease, though, he impetuously gave his favorite mistress, Diane de Poitiers, something else entirely, all the French crown jewels. Oh my God. Oh, thank you, Ruth. Hey, Diet Pepsi. Right, Kung Fu? Henry's enchantment with Diane, who was old enough to be his mother, was in direct proportion to the distaste he had for his dumpy and unappealing queen, Catherine de' Medici of Italy. Nevertheless, wife and mistress did develop a tenuous relationship of sorts. The queen quietly tolerated the affair, while her rival moved into the household and treated Catherine with a kind of contemptuous affection, even nursing her when she came down with scarlet fever. It was Diane who gently nudged the king out of her bed so he could sire legitimate children with his wife as duty demanded. Oh man, she made him go spend time with his wife and get her pregnant. Once during an argument with the king and his mistress over Henry's policies towards her native land, Catherine disdainfully confronted Diane. I have read the histories of this kingdom, she informed her rival, and I have found in them that from time to time, at all periods, WHORES have managed the business of kings. Years later, after Henry II's death in 1559, Catherine wrote of her true feelings regarding the humiliating situation with her husband and mistress. I was hospitable to Diane, he was the king. Yet, even so, I always let him know that it was to my great regret, for never has a woman who loves her husband liked his WHORE, for even though this is an ugly word for us to use, one cannot call her anything else. Oh, she still resented. It's wild the deference that they had to show a monarch. I mean, ugh, It's just weird. Yeah, it's really interesting, Marcel. It's fascinating. Hey, McCatherine, good to see you. Okay. And it says, right, Kung Fu? Given the atmosphere in which they grew up, it's not surprising that some of Henry and Catherine's children were a little unconventional when it came to sex. Henry III, who succeeded his father and two brothers in the Valois line of French kings, was an ostentatious trans person who this book is was published in the late 90s, so there is some outdated language in here, just FYI friends. Um where was I at? Ostentatious trans person who surrounded himself with an obsequious band of gay young men the French scathingly called mignons. The king and his male harem loved nothing more than dressing up and prancing around Paris in lace and ruffles with long curls flowing under dainty little caps. On special occasions, Henry dolled himself up magnificently, dripping with diamonds and swathed in silk. Historians have noted the peculiar affection Catherine de' Medici had for her son Henry. The formidable woman the French came to call Madame Serpent had consolidated her power after the death of her husband, and with three sons and a now reigning in a row reigning as kings of France, became history's ultimate queen mother. An avid disciple of Machiavelli's blueprint for power, the prince, she considered her fellow Florentine almost a personal guru. With a daunting combination of guile, treachery, and shrewd intelligence, the plump matron in her habitual black dress was ruthless in the struggle to maintain her family's power. Yet, while Catherine orchestrated the lives of all her children, using them as pawns to achieve her political ends, Henry was special. Her devotion to him, in fact, bordered on the incestuous. She was certainly indulgent to his flamboyant lifestyle, often or even arranging lavish orgies for his royal pleasure. Henry, however, was completely controlled by his minions, some of whom wielded enormous power. Fights often broke out among the favorites, sometimes to the death, as they vied for the king's affection. Despite her overwhelming maternal devotion, Catherine was often left out of the loop. With the kingdom shredded by religious wars, the government coffers empty and attacked by neighboring Spain, a looming threat, Catherine begged for Henry's attention to the desperate situation she was trying so hard to remedy for him. Things are in a worse state than they are thought to be, the ailing queen mother wrote in one of many long letters to the king while traveling around France in a vain attempt to generate support for him. I beg you to control your finances very carefully in order to raise money for your service without having to rob your people, for you are on the brink of a general revolt, and whoever tells you otherwise deceives you. All Catherine's tireless efforts on her beloved son's behalf were ignored, causing her no end of distress. The king of trifles, as his disgusted subjects called him, was more interested in finding new ways to entertain his boys than he was in the fate of France. There were occasions, though, when Henry became entirely, it just occurred to me since he's French, I should be saying Henri probably instead of Henry. My bad, friends. I'll continue on because I've been saying it that way. There were occasions, though, when Henry became overcome by a violent revulsion to his habitual frivolity. During these times, he transformed himself into a religious fanatic, publicly flogging himself, walking barefoot in a bizarre religious processions, and outfitting himself in monk's clothes with a small rosary of ivory skulls hanging from his waist. I am frightened that everything is not golden here. Auguste de Busbec wrote after witnessing the demonstration of Henry's unconventional piety. During several of his manic bouts of religion, the king made pilgrimage to Chartres on foot, begging the Virgin Mary to give him a son and heir. Alas, even the Mother of God couldn't help him there. While he loved dressing up his wife, Queen Louise, and doing her makeup and playing with her hair, he was rarely up to the task of sleeping with her. The bouts of, religious fanaticism sound like there was definitely some mental issues there. I mean, I don't, obviously, there were tons of, gay, queer, trans, all over the spectrum, kings, queens, nobility back then. It was only kind of tolerated as opposed to accepted. And people either thought that it was like a non sexual physical act almost. I don't know. There's a story that you'll hear in here if I'm able to get to it today before I get too tired and have to stop, where this pope, like the popes were crazy debaucherous back in the day. No, he wasn't the syphilis one. He was a different one. But you're definitely right there, Fluffy. Um, there was a pope back in the day who literally made the statement, a direct quote from him was something like, there's nothing more to I don't remember what he called it, but basically sexual relations with women and young boys, nothing more to it than rubbing one's hands together. Like basically, like it's just a physical action. It doesn't matter. It was just such a weird, weird take. Crazy. Okay, let me get to the next one I've got marked. Oh, there's a part here that I noted about King James, King James of the biblical translation that we know of, the King James version, that King James. It says, "It is perhaps ironic that those fundamentalists repulsed by homosexuality would condemn King James by citing the very Bible that bears his name. In any event, his preference for men was not an uncommon thing among British kings. William II, Richard I, the lion-hearted hero king of the Robin Hood legends, and Edward II were all reputed to have been gay." I just found that part fun, interesting and fun. Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that, Kung Fu. Although I remember seeing the mummified remains of, I believe it was like the Icelandic or Slavic lady. They said she would have been high up aristocracy or maybe aristocracy or maybe royalty. Um, and she had tattoos. I remember they were completely preserved. It was really cool. Okay. Now, the next story I've got marked, we are talking about Elizabeth I of England, the Virgin Queen. And it says, spinsterhood suited Elizabeth I just fine. She loved being Queen of England far too much to share her power with a man, and she would have been, as she would have been expected to do if she married. She much preferred to rule on her own and became one of Britain's greatest monarchs. "I am married to England," she was fond of proclaiming. But as much as Elizabeth gloried in the cult of the Virgin Queen that she encouraged to flourish around her, she bitterly resented any of the women in her service getting something she would never have, namely a fulfilling sex life. She was angry with love, Sir Edward Stafford later observed. While it was considered a major social coup to be one of the Queen's carefully selected ladies in waitings, these advantageous positions came at a hefty price. The women were expected to live like Elizabeth. This meant continuous early exercise, long hours, and lonely nights. If any of them wished to marry, they had to obtain the Queen's blessing first, the Queen's permission, and this blessing was rarely granted without a series of grudging obstacles put into place by the jealous monarch. One couple had to wait nearly a decade before Elizabeth finally resented and let them wed. In another instance, young Mistress Arundel was foolish enough to remark to the Queen that she favored a man and would marry him if only she could get her father's permission. To the surprise of those present, the Queen benevolently answered, "You seem honest, in faith, and I will sue for you to your father." The girl, elated to have such a powerful advocate on her side, was convinced that her father could never deny her now. And sure enough, Sir Robert Arundel was called before the Queen and eagerly gave his consent. Content, Elizabeth dismissed him, saying, "I will do the rest." Mistress Arundel was then summoned and told that her father's cooperation had been obtained. "Then I shall be happy, and if it please your grace," the delighted girl replied, in belief that Elizabeth was about to grant her the husband of her choice. "So thou shalt, but not to be a fool and marry," the Queen answered, a bitter edge rising in her voice. "I have his consent given to me, and I vow thou shalt never get it into thy possession. I see thou art a bold one to own thy foolishness so readily." With this withering surprise, the stunned girl was waved away from the Queen's presence. Getting Elizabeth's seal of approval was very difficult, but woe to the woman who risked bypassing the process altogether. When Mary Shelton secretly wed James Scudamore, the queen flew into such a rage upon hearing the news that in throttling her, she broke the bride's little finger. No one ever bought her husband more dearly, remarked Eleanor Bridge, except possibly Elizabeth's cousin, Catherine Grey, the sister of the ill fated 9 Days Queen, Jane Grey. So that is so wild to me that I already knew that about her, but that she was just so freaking jealous of her ladies in waitings and that she would get violent with them, absolutely violent. And what's crazy is Charles has done that. It's been reported all the way up into the 80s and 90s, last that I read. I don't know if any stories have come out later than the 90s of Charles going into a rage, jumping up and down, screaming, grabbing his servants by the throat. Like it's pretty wild when, in my opinion, when you actually read everything about Charles. And it's so crazy because we don't have any stories of the queen acting like that. Like she wasn't perfect. She definitely had a big blind spot when it came to Andrew, and it's not cool, but we don't have stories of the queen. Oh, thank you, Trenton TLC. I appreciate that so much. But yeah, Charles and Andrew. Oh, yeah. Okay. Now it's moving on to France. Talk about Louis, the Sun King. Says being royal required a certain faith in one's inherent superiority over ordinary men. Few monarchs lacked it. Next to Louis XIV of France, though, even the most self enamored of sovereigns came off looking neurotically insecure by comparison. In fact, Louis refused to be grouped with other kings under the term their majesties because, he explained, from that there might be deduced an equality which does not exist. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've heard about it. Fluffy too. It's crazy. For most of his 72-year reign from 1643 to 1715, the longest in European history, Louis worked methodically to have all the glory and prestige of France embodied in himself. I am the state, he proudly declared, even if the state needed 6-inch heels to look taller. As an absolute monarch, Louis dictated nearly every facet of French life according to his own rarefied vision of how it should be. Nothing escaped his attention, from the national religion to tree maintenance. He even mandated a 25-step itinerary to be followed by visitors to the Garden of Versailles. It was all about Louis. Under him, there was no room for opposition. He and he alone decided what was good and what was right. The subjugation of a monarch to the law of his people, he said, is the last calamity which can befall a gentleman of our rank. Laws were initiated, aggressive wars pursued, and art and literature commissioned, all designed to make Louis look good. My dominant passion is certainly love of glory, he once admitted. For the royal emblem, Louis XIV adopted the sun because, as he explained in his memoirs, the unique quality of the brilliance which surrounds it, the light it communicates to other heavenly bodies, which compose a kind of court around it, the just and even allotment of its light among all various tropics of the world, the good it does everywhere, endlessly producing on all sides of life joy, activity, its uninterrupted movement, despite an always tranquil appearance, its constant and invariable. When is this description going to end? Its constant and invariable path from which it is never drawn or diverted is assuredly the most beautiful and vivid image of a great monarch. That was one sentence, friends, of Louis describing himself and why he is a sun god. Isn't that the dang truth, Kung Fu? I am a big Diana fan. And, as a Diana fan, I've researched her deeply. I understand she wasn't perfect. She did a lot of things that would be very questionable today. A big difference between her and, let's say Meghan Markle's PR missteps and things that she's done, bad things said, is Diana was 18 when she married Charles. She was, of legal age, but basically still a child, and so the things that can be said like, "Oh, Diana, she was in the wrong there for sure." But she was a freaking teenager, like trying to grow up in that environment with a man who didn't love her and married her only because the woman he loved, he was told, "You can never marry her. You've got to marry a virgin vessel." Yeah, exactly, Kung Fu. She wasn't perfect. She was kind and she was human. And that's why we all love her like we do. Okay, back to Louis. The Sun King put himself on dazzling display at Versailles, where in 1682 permanently moved his court and the seat of the government. The palace itself was designed to be a glittering reflection of its most real inhabitant, and everyone was welcome to come and observe him in his daily, unwavering routine. Onlookers were on hand every morning when the king arose, got dressed, and shaved. At meals, they could marvel at his dexterity with an egg as he clipped off the top with just one stroke of the spoon. A very privileged few even got to watch him as he sat perched on his other throne when nature called. They wanted to watch him poop, y'all, and wipe his butt. They literally were fighting over the chance to wipe Louis XIV's butt. What price does even the most repulsive thing that comes from the king have in this country? Asked a shocked visitor from Italy after observing this unusual access. The writer, Jean de la Bruyere, I'm sure I totally butchered that, friends. I'm sorry. I tried. Described how Louis worshipped at Mass under the adoring gaze of his subject. The great of the nation meet each day at a certain time in a temple called a church. They form a vast circle at the foot of the altar, standing with their backs to the priest and the holy mysteries, their faces lifted towards their king, who can be seen kneeling in tribute. One cannot help noticing in his usage a sort of subordination, for the people seem to be adoring the prince who is adoring God. Louis XIV was a genius at making Versailles appear to be the pinnacle of prestige and honor for the thousands of nobles who lived there, with himself as the radiant center of it all. In this way, the king utterly obliterated their ancient power by having them chase the artificial gold that he created and dangled before them. The once mighty aristocracy fought for the honor of cramped rooms, handing the king his shirt in the morning and holding a candle for him or accompanying him on a hunt. Louis created hundreds of meaningless posts that the nobility were eager to snatch up at enormous costs to themselves, yet even he was surprised at how successful this venture became. Who will buy them? The king was once asked the minister of finance, who wanted to create even more artificial offices. Your Majesty ignores one of the finest prerogatives of the King of France, the minister replied, which is that when a king creates an office, God instantly creates a fool to buy it. Right, Ruth? Yeah, that was pretty baller. I think it was so appropriate that after Diana, there was not another Princess of Wales until Catherine. In my opinion, Catherine deserves it. You rarely ever see Catherine make a wrong move ever. And she always has acted appreciative of what she's given in the position, in my opinion, anyway. If anyone disagrees, let me know. It's okay to disagree. Let's see, where was I at? A rigid and highly nuanced code of etiquette flourished at Versailles, designed to flatter the nobility into worshipful and grateful complacency. People were thrilled to be granted the privilege to sit in the king's presence rather than stand, or to have him doff his hat at certain angles, which designated various levels of favor. He substituted ideal rewards for real ones, wrote the Duc de Saint Simon, an avid court observer and participant, and these operated through jealousy, the petty preferences he showed many times a day, and his artfulness in showing them. One of the most coveted marks of favor was an invitation to the king's more intimate residence at Marly. According to St. Simon, it was a crime not to ask for Marly either always or often, although this did not mean they would obtain it. While Louis operated using an elaborate code of flattery toward the nobility, he demanded it for himself as well. He was surrounded by a sea of sycophants as a result. Soon after he became master, his ministers, his generals, his mistresses, his courtiers noticed that he had a weakness for, rather a love of, glory, St. Simon wrote. They spoiled him with praise. Commendation and flattery pleased him to such a point that at the most obvious compliments were received kindly, and the most insidious were relished even more. It was the only way to approach him, and those who won his love knew it well and never tired of praising him. Oh man. That is why his ministers were so powerful, for they had more opportunities to burn incense before him and attribute every success to him and vow that they had learned everything from him. The only way to please him was submissiveness, baseness, an air of admiring and crawling toadyism by giving the impression that he was the only source of wisdom. In the ranks of the obsequious were legion. There was, for example, the subject who responded when Louis asked for the time, whatever time your majesty desires. Oh, that's hilarious. I agree, Kung Fu, totally. Okay, this is crazy, y'all. The aura of majesty was so intoxicating that basking in it took absurd forms. When Louis formed a fistula, a deep ulcer of the rectum that required surgery, the ailment became ultra chic, and those fortunate enough to share in the Operation du Roi were much envied. The surgery carried so much prestige, in fact, that men without fistulas begged and bribed doctors to perform the procedure on them anyway. An entirely new spin on the fine art of kissing ass. Isn't that wild, y'all? Who would want a surgery like that? Right, Marcel? Hey, Tony. Yeah, I'm not a fan either, Jelly. Like Camilla, she has managed to really act right since Diana's death and not, try and do more than she should, in my opinion. But still, like, I could never forget how blatant Camilla was while Diana was alive. And Charles and Camilla both were out there telling us that Camilla would not actually take the title of queen, that she would be known as queen consort. And then all of a sudden, immediately after their inauguration, went back on that. And the palace started instructing everyone to call her Queen Camilla, not Queen Consort Camilla. And well, what does it really matter that much at the end of the day? It's just that they lied. They just casually lied about it. Because initially they were saying that she would never take on any title of queen at all. And then it was, well, she'll be queen consort. And kind of wait around to see how people react to that. And they're like, guess what? It's queen. That just irritated me, friends. Maybe I'm too harsh. Probably know that I'm too harsh at times, but still. Why people gotta lie in our face, Okay, I'm trying to. Okay, this one is crazy. We're going back to Russia again. Exactly, Ivona. Sorry, my eye is itching, friends. Let me get a drink real quick. Drinking kombucha today. Anyone else ever drink kombucha? Fermented tea? That's funny, Kung Fu. Kung Fu. Okay, this one is about Empress Anna of Russia. The anger of and honestly, I really strongly wonder if, like the ice castle from Frozen, Elsa and Anna, wasn't somewhat based off this story to an extent. The anger of the prince means death. Over centuries, countless executions by royal order proved this warning to be absolutely true. But with Empress Anna of Russia, the anger of the sovereign meant something else entirely: excruciating humiliation. The early 18th century monarch had a knack for conjuring up Sorry, the most embarrassing of punishments when she was displeased. In one case, three nobles who had managed to get on the empress's bad side were condemned to live like hens for a week. Chickens, laying hens, dressed in feathers and made to roost in specially outfitted nests, complete with eggs. The unfortunate gentlemen were ordered to sit and cluck until the sentence was complete. She's a sadist. She's an absolute sadist. Oh my God. Yeah. Says this was mild compared to the ordeal another noble, Prince Michael Alexeyevich Galitzin, had to face. He had the nerve to marry a woman not to Anna's liking. And this made her angry. So angry, in fact, that she stripped him of his title and transformed the erstwhile aristocrat into a court jester. But this was just the beginning. When the wife he had chosen for himself died in 1740, Anna decided it was her turn to select a mate for him. She chose a woman who was, oh, poor lady, says that she chose a woman who was reportedly one of the ugliest ladies in Russia. Imagine having that title. For the wedding party, Anna dug into her collection of deformed and freakish human beings to lead a procession of drunkards and other lowlifes, all pulled in carriages, goats, and pigs. The happy couple followed in a cage as the crowd gathered to watch. After the wedding ceremony and breakfast reception, it was time for the honeymoon. No doubt one of the chilliest on record. The spot Anna had selected for them was right on the banks of the frozen Neva River. I'm probably saying that wrong. It's Neva. Her wedding present was a palace there made entirely of ice. It was a huge structure, complete with a honeymoon suite that included an ice bed and ice pillows. Outside, ice statues and ice trees were carved, with even little ice birds perched on them. There were even 6 ice cannons that actually fired. As the wedding party cheered them on, the newlyweds were forced inside the ice palace and ordered to bed down and consummate the marriage. Somehow they did, despite the frigid temperature. 9 months later, ornery old Anna was dead. At about the same time, Golitzin's wife presented him with twin boys. Despite the circumstances of their less than fairy tale reunion, it was said that the couple actually did, in fact, live happily ever after. What the freaking hell? Like, can y'all imagine the work that would have to be done to build an ice palace like that? Like, how many people, how much slave labor or paid labor, whatever, like, just to for them to be cold? I don't what on earth? Like, that seems like a mental ill level of sadism. Not that all sadism isn't, out there, but what the heck, you know? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I'm gonna turn the screen off for just a minute, friends, while I have a little break here and take a drink. Be right back, and we will continue on. But yeah, I really wonder if, remember how in Frozen, Elsa had that big ice castle? With her name being Anna, it just seems like that's probably what was going on there. Mine too, Ivona. Like, what the hell? Crazy, crazy. I forgot. Since I'm still talking, instead of doing the be right back, I could just turn my camera off. I haven't done live stream in a while because I've been feeling so bad and I'm forgetting the basics here, friends. Yeah, I feel really sorry for that lady, like, to be picked to be married specifically because your appearance gave that reputation. Like, how sad, you know? She was probably just fine. Hey, Kathleen. Kung Fu, right? Do you wanna build a palace? So weird. Like, I just can't imagine being obsessed with punishment like that to the point of having that much work done just to be like, haha, now you have to bed down in an ice palace. What do you think? A lot of people probably wouldn't mind an ice palace as long as they have blankets. Not me. I can't handle cold. I'm a big weenie. Okay. Let's see what the next one I marked was. Okay. This is about the English king, George the Fourth. It's called Gluttony, Eat, Drink, and Be Mocked. George IV was a man of great wit and impeccable taste, a bon vivant noted for his elegant style, keen eye for fine art, architecture, and his inclination toward grand generosity and warm amiability. Nevertheless, this early 19th century British monarch was the perpetual target of savage lampoons and public ridicule. He could barely ride out of the palace in his carriage without being hooted and jeered on the streets of London. Some of the invective had to do with his shameless extravagance and enormous debts, his obvious greed for his sick father's throne, the undue credit he claimed for British victory over Napoleon, and his flaunted love affairs and spectacularly disastrous marriage. But it was George's status as a slob who drank too much, often spiking his liquor with heaping doses of laudanum, that inspired some of the most howling derision. Though he wasn't the biggest monarch ever to strain British throne, he was almost certainly the booziest, charming and dignified when sober, everything but when drunk. Hey, Stephanie, I'm glad you made it in. Yeah, just a reminder, everyone who wants to be included in the drawing for this book, just say I want to be included, and I'll go through the chat after the live like I did before and put all the usernames in a wheel and spin. Just like I said, obviously, if to be in the drawing, you'll need to be comfortable giving me your address so I can mail you the book. Okay. He was still a young prince when his drinking started taking its toll on his appearance, giving him a premature look of dissipation and generating snickers among his subjects. His behavior at a ball given by Lady Hoptoun in 1787 was typical of his early carousing. According to one account, he posted himself in the doorway to the terror of everybody that went by, flung his arms around the Duchess of Ancaster's neck, kissed her with a great smack, threatened to pull off Lord Galloway's wig and knock out his false teeth, and played pranks of a drunken man upon the stage till some of his companions called for his carriage and almost forced him away. They basically called a cab for him and said, "You're too drunk to be at the party." Had he been a more popular prince, that kind of scene might have been thought delightfully eccentric or sympathetically ignored, but George was widely disliked and his critics pounced on his all too apparent weakness. The Times of London condemned him as a hard-drinking, swearing, whoring man who at all times would prefer a girl in a bottle to politics and a sermon. Oh, yeah. And those whose states of happiness were gluttony, drunkenness, and gambling. One of the most scathing images of the prince was widely distributed caricature by James Gilray, portraying him as a voluptuary under the horrors of a digestion. George is shown picking his teeth with a fork as he recovers from an enormous meal, his guts busting out of his trousers. Beneath his thighs are empty wine bottles. Behind him are medicines for the piles for stinking breath and two contemporary cures for venereal disease, such as Vino's vegetable syrup and leeks peels. Oh man. If this ridicule wasn't enough, Stephanie, Pink Chihuahua was live at the same time as I went live. I didn't realize it until right as I was going. I felt bad that I did it at the same time. I just kind of go live. Oh, Stephanie started at the beginning, I think, of the live, so she's commenting back at the beginning. But yeah, I just kind of have to go live whenever I feel good enough, like I could do it for a while, like beyond. And so it's hard for me to schedule in advance too far. Um, if this ridicule wasn't enough, friends and family added to it with their own indictments. After one memorable binge, George's only legitimate child, Princess Charlotte, cracked that too much oil was put into the lamp, and his tenuous friendship with the famous dandy of the period, Beau Brummel, crashed into mor- to crashed to a mortifying public end at a ball when George, harboring a lingering resentment over Brummel's persistent failure to show proper deference to his royal person, sounds like Prince Andrew, um, spoke to their mutual friend, Lord Alvaney, but pointedly ignored Brummel. Alvaney, the rebuffed Brummel, shouted across the room, "Who is your fat friend?" Oh, he was insulting the king's appearance, body shaming him. In an earlier era, heads would have rolled for such audacious disrespect, but George presided over a monarchy, first as Prince Regent during his father, George III's mental incapacity, then as king, that had slowly been losing its power over the years. As much as he surely would have loved to order the executions of his tormentors, there was little George could do to counter their relentless assault, particularly since they were often right. When the Examiner published a particularly nasty, oh, something I gotta break in and comment on here is it's funny. Thank you, Jelly Bean. I'm working on that painting behind me to go over my fireplace just for myself. So I haven't been videoing it too much, but left it in the background. So I think it looks nice. Um, yeah, it's funny. A lot of people think like gossipy, reactionary commentary, tabloids, TMZ, that's all a modern thing, way all the way back to like the French Revolution times and stuff like that. Those existed. They were called lampoons and things like that. And these this story that I'm reading right now is early 1800s, and a lot of these tabloids already exist, like the Examiner and stuff like that. So, I would just say none of that is new. Hey, Shorty Pie. Thank you, Kathleen. I appreciate it. Okay. When the Examiner published a particularly nasty attack on the Prince Regent in 1812, calling him, among other things, a violator of his word, a libertine head over ears in debt, a despiser of domestic ties, he was successful in having the author and his brother, the paper's editor, arrested and charged with intention to traduce and vilify His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, Regent in the United Kingdom. Writer and editor were fined and jailed, but it was hardly a royal victory, as the sentences only made George more unpopular. It was during this time that a devastating verse by Charles Lamb made the rounds. Not a fatter fish than he flounders round the polar sea. See his blubbers at his gills. What a world of drink he swills. Every fish of generous kind scuds aside or shrinks behind, but about his presence keep all the monsters of the deep. Name or title, what has he? Is he regent of the sea by his bulk and by his size, by his oily qualities? These or else my eyesight fails. This should be the Prince of Wales, but they spelt it with an H, W, like the animal, instead of, like the Prince of Wales, Wales. Oh man. Early 1800s. Snark. Things didn't get much better when George became king in 1820, probably because he continued to give critics fresh ammunition. They had a grand time with the king and his last mistress, Lady Conyngham, including the pamphleteer. Pamphlets are kind of like the lampoons. Exactly. Diet Pepsi. Pamphleteer who distributed this verse: quaffing their claret, then mingling their lips, or tickling the fat around each other's hips. Ooh, that's what they were writing about the king and his mistress. A lifetime of debauchery started wrecking the king's body and mind towards the end of his life, and he became a recluse at Windsor Castle. His appetite, however, was little affected. His mode of living now was really beyond belief, noted Mrs. Abunthought, who had chronicled other events in the life of the king. The Duke of Wellington was a frequent visitor at Windsor and noted the king's breakfast menu one day. Oh, wow. Listen to this, y'all. This is his breakfast, not his full day menu. A pigeon, a beefsteak pie, of which he ate two pigeons and three beefsteaks, 3 parts of a bottle of Moselle, a glass of dry champagne, 2 glasses of port, a glass of brandy. He had taken laudanum the night before, again before his breakfast, again last night, and again this morning. Not surprisingly, George IV died not long after. It had been a life of great potential never realized, of appetites out of control. Of course, the critics had the last word. There was never an individual less regretted by his fellow creatures than this deceased king, the Times of London editorialized the day after his funeral. What eye has wept for him? What heart has heaved one throb of unmercenary sorrow for that leviathan of the haut ton, George IV? He was not liked. Like, not liked at all. Holy dang. Ooh, now we get kind of closer to modern times, but still in England, in the UK. Edward the Eighth and Wallace Warfield Simpson. Right, Shorty Pie? Holy hell. Okay. If Edward the Eighth really was in cahoots with the Nazis, as has been alleged, it would prove that he was at least doing something after his abdication of the British throne in 1936. As it stands, however, the rumors of collaboration are almost certainly untrue, making the ex-king's life every bit as idle and vacuous as it appeared. Now, once again, this was published in the late 90s. More has come out since about Edward's connections with Hitler and stuff like that. I think the author's conclusion is wrong there. I do think he was in cahoots, but you know, everybody come to their own conclusions. I could be wrong. I am not infallible, friends. Led by his grasping, domineering duchess, the woman for whom he set aside his crown to marry, the Duke of Windsor, as he was titled after the abdication, adopted a lifestyle almost totally devoid of purpose. His main preoccupation was social flitting with his wife between New York, Paris, and Palm Beach, always courting the rich and absorbing their hospitality. The only real responsibility the Duke seemed willing to shoulder was the care and feeding of the couple's pet pugs. He sounds a lot like Andrew. He had given up the only job he was born to do, but he had nothing to replace it. Still, Edward insisted on retaining all of his royal dignity and prerequisites, and those he expected for his wife. Again, that sounds so much like Andrew because it was just found out. Some paparazzi got pictures of his moving boxes, and they all have HRH marked on them. HRH, and then what room the stuff goes to. Oh, that's so funny. Yes, Stephanie, she's still behind there. She's listening to the part about Catherine of Russia. She's going to crack up when she gets to this part. And here's me replying to all of her comments. Oh, yeah, definitely. I believe it, Fluffy and Jelly. The servants wore liveried uniforms, while portraits of the Duke and Duchess hung amidst those of his royal ancestors in their meticulously decorated homes and apartments. Without a kingdom to rule, Edward and Wallace presided over a small fiefdom of servants, chauffeurs, and cooks. If Edward ever did expend any real energy, aside from his perpetual efforts to wring money out of the British government, it was in his almost obsessive desire to have Wallace granted a royal title. This had been refused to her when she married Edward. Sensibilities at the time were utterly opposed to the brash, twice divorced American from Baltimore being styled Her Royal Highness. It was a snub bitterly resented by Edward, and one that he never ceased trying to remedy. His persistence on the issue drove deeper the wedge between the Duke and his family, a relationship that was already strained because of his abdication crisis and the royal family's refusal to receive Wallace. I can't tell you how grieved I am at your brother being so tiresome about the HRH, Edward's mother, Queen Mary, wrote to his brother, George VI, who had ascended the throne in his place. Giving her this title would be fatal, and after all these years, I fear lest people think that we condone this dreadful marriage, which was such a blow to us in every way. Even as Britain was bravely facing Hitler's devastating onslaught during World War II and Buckingham Palace was being bombed, the former king was badgering the government and the royal family about the title he coveted for his wife. Taking time out from leading the nation's war effort, Prime Minister Winston Churchill offered the Duke a bit of advice on the issue. Having voluntarily resigned the finest throne in the world, Churchill wrote, it would be natural to treat all minor questions of ceremony and precedence as entirely beneath your interest and dignity. Now, that right there, to me, completely sums up what most people's irritation is with Harry and Meghan. Because if they were going to leave behind the royal family, denounce it all as completely racist, call the Commonwealth Empire 2.0, which they did in their Harry and Meghan documentary, as Winston Churchill said, it would be completely natural to treat all minor questions of ceremony and precedence as entirely beneath your interest and dignity. And instead, they're grasping and clamoring and wanting everyone to recognize their titles all the time. We found out, I think it was, I can't remember if it was a Vanity Fair article or The Cut, that Meghan has a butler announce Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, to an empty room as she comes in, you know? Like her story would be a lot more believable if she would actually leave that stuff behind, in my opinion. But then again, Meghan really, she hasn't done anything too terrible. She's just annoying, She makes PR misstep after PR misstep, plagiarizes things and stuff, but she's not, she hasn't murdered anyone like Gypsy Rose. She's not an Andrew, as far as we know. She's never trafficked anyone or accepted anyone that was trafficked. Although I think her and Harry got way closer to Andrew and Sarah than they want anyone to admit. Anyway, I'll stop ranting about them, y'all. Sorry. Okay, vigorously pursuing the HRH issue was about as busy as Edward ever got during the war, which sadly enough was probably the most active period of his post-abdication career. He did serve as governor of the Bahamas during this time. With the world at war, this was not one of the most taxing assignments, yet Edward found it so unpalatable that he asked to leave soon after he arrived. Oh, that's the dang truth, Kung Fu. Yeah. Right, Fluffy? uh, in August, after all, was not the most pleasant month to settle on a tropical island. Churchill found the request a tad premature. He was very grieved to hear that you were entertaining such an idea, Walter Monckton wrote Edward. The Prime Minister hoped that, with the people of Britain were suffering so much, the Duke would be willing to put up with the discomfort and remain at your post until the weather conditions make things less unpleasant. Yeah, the people of London were being bombed, Edward did reluctantly come around to his patriotic duty, but insisted that the accommodations in the Bahamas were unacceptable in their current state. We found Government House quite uninhabitable, the Duke told his friend and predecessor, the Governor Bede Clifford, and fled from the place after a week's picnic and sandflies. The money allotted for the home's upgrade was insufficient. Edward informed Colonel Secretary George Lloyd, and he requested additional funds to whip it into shape. Churchill's response was quite succinct. Comment is needless, he jotted in the memo. That sounds like how the Queen was getting about Harry and Meghan towards the end. Like, blah, recollections may vary. Don't want to talk to them. Thank goodness Meghan isn't coming. After their grueling experience in the Bahamas, Edward and Wallace felt themselves entitled to a little leisure after the war. They spent the rest of their lives drowning in it. A typical day for the Duke consisted of a few rounds of golf, weather permitting, maybe a nap, then a drink, but never before 4 p.m. His main job was passing the Duchess's orders to the help, or meekly following them himself as she busily arranged for that evening's dinner and social activities. In a moment of perhaps unintentional honesty, Edward revealed the sheer emptiness of his life. You know what my day was today? He said to the wife of an American diplomat. I got up late and I went with the Duchess and watched her buy a hat. And then on the way home, I had the car drop me and the boys to watch some of your soldiers playing football. And then I planned to take a walk, but it was so cold that I could hardly bear it. When I got home, the Duchess was having her French lesson, so I had no one to talk to. So I got lots of tin boxes down, which my mother had sent me last week, and looked through them. They were essays and so on that I had written when I was in France, studying French before the Great War. I'm not that much of a reading man. He sounds so empty. Empty, empty. Yeah. Okay, I skipped quite a few stories there and marking them. They were either not interesting or stuff I knew that YouTube wouldn't like. Let me get a drink real quick. Okay, now we're back to Russia and Catherine the Great again, but this is before she takes power, really. Catherine the Great of Russia, whose indiscriminate sexual adventures would later become legendary, came to her wedding bed a blushing virgin and, thanks to her husband, stayed that way for nearly a decade. She arrived in Russia from Germany in 1744 with vague royal connections and soon became engaged to Peter, designated by the Empress Elizabeth to succeed her as Peter III. What she found was a frighteningly alien culture, only superficially civilized, and a massively disappointing fiance. Peter was an ugly, mean spirited simpleton who showed no interest in his future bride. He much preferred putting his toy soldiers through endless military maneuvers. I understood perfectly how little he wanted to see me and how little affection he bore me, she wrote in her memoirs. My self esteem and vanity were wounded, but I was too proud to complain. The wedding night was disastrous. Dressed in a pink nightie specially ordered from Paris, the naive Catherine waited anxiously in bed for her new husband, who was off carousing with his valets. The groom finally arrived after midnight, declaring that it would amuse the servants to see us in bed together. With that, he fell into the sack and passed out. Night after night, he ignored her, concentrating instead on his own diversions. Sometimes he would bring his huge collection of toys to bed, forcing Catherine to play army with him. Once she walked into their room to find a rat hanging by a rope. I didn't mean to read animal abuse. I'm sorry, friends. I forgot that was in there. Peter explained that it had committed treason and was paying the penalty. Yeah, toy soldiers. He was a gamer before, right? And it also reminds me of Prince Andrew too, the former Prince Andrew, because he has those teddy bears, the 50 teddy bears that people have to arrange in the bed, and apparently he started acting really weird when he was being kicked out of Royal Lodge and started walking around talking about, oh, but the teddy bears are going to be upset. And what are the teddy bears going to think, and how are they going to understand? Dude is creepzoid, like, and I'm not sure he's all there. The future czar also had a tendency to chatter incessantly, bombarding his bride with whatever bit of trivia happened to have captured his limited imagination. Well, now I have some sympathy with him on that. I do that, friends. That's part of why I like being a YouTuber, so I can bombard an audience with trivia stuff that I find interesting, and the audience actually wants to see it. You can choose to click off or on. My friends and family can't do that. So that's the one thing I have some sympathy with Peter on there. Oh, Catherine says, often I was very bored by his visits, which would last for hours, she wrote, and even exhausted by them, for he never sat down, and I always had to walk up and down the room with him. The droning chit chat, however, never led to bed, so no doubt frustrating the woman who once recalled vigorously writing her pillow as an adolescent, trying to satisfy physical yearnings not yet defined. As the unconsummated marriage progressed, Peter became increasingly tedious. During one period, he decided to become a dog trainer, filling their bedroom with barking animals. It was amid this stench, she wrote, that we slept. Oh, yeah, Kung Fu, that was a real problem with the royal families back in the day. Uh, Despite her loathsome marriage, Catherine knew her future was bound to Russia and was determined to absorb its culture totally. She learned that language, read voraciously, and adopted Russian Orthodox faith, and carefully cultivated alliances in the debauched court of Empress Elizabeth. She also took to physical activity to relieve the marital strains, riding her horse for hours. The more violent this exercise was, the more I loved it, she wrote. Peter, for his part, would not have been able to satisfy his wife even if he wanted to. In the words of the French agent Champeau, he was unable to have children because of an obstacle, which some people remedy by circumcision, but for which he thought there was no cure. He had phimosis, a deformation of the foreskin that made erections excruciatingly painful. Even after he consented to the operation that liberated him, he still refused to sleep with his wife. Instead, he took on a series of mistresses, keeping Catherine apprised of every dalliance. Wow. Hey, Dragon, thank you. That's awesome. Oh, yeah, it does. Totally does, Shorty Pie. I gotta turn my fan towards me a little bit. I hope it doesn't cause too much of a noise, like background noise or roar, but part of my POTS condition, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, part of that is my body temperature doesn't regulate well, so I almost always have to have a fan on me. Okay. Catherine, meanwhile, was becoming wiser to the ways of the world. Engaging in innocent court flirtations, she gradually discovered that she was indeed desirable. Her confidence and passions aroused, the long deprived princess finally lost her virginity to a young officer 8 years after her wedding. Oh, good. Thank you, Jelly. A succession of lovers and several illegitimate children followed. Then Catherine really got her revenge. The Empress Elizabeth died in 1762, and Peter became ruler over subjects who hated him. He made peace with Frederick the Great of Prussia, just as the Russian army was at the point of defeating Frederick's armies, and compounded the outrage by making his troops wear Prussian-style uniforms. Peter III also made the foolish mistake of humiliating his now formidable wife in public, forcing her at one point to stand up with the rest of his subjects when the royal family was toasted. Her dignified behavior in the face of all of her husband's insults gained Catherine's sympathy and respect, and soon a plot to overthrow the Tsar centered around her. With the Russian army and establishment firmly behind her, Catherine forced Peter's abdication. She was proclaimed empress while her husband was discreetly murdered a few days later. He was far more effective general, it seems, with 10 soldiers on a loveless bed. Hey, Stacia, good to see you. Right, Kung Fu? Holy hell. Just a reminder, anyone who wants to be included for the drawing, just say so in the chat, and I will go through later and put everyone's name into a Wheelspin app. And then, like I said, just make sure you're comfortable giving me your address so I can mail you the book if you want to be in the drawing. Okay, now the next chapter goes to Austria. We're talking about Marie Antoinette's mother. Austrian Empress Maria Theresa should not be judged too harshly for the series of miserable marriages she arranged for her large brood of children in the 18th century. Surely, dynastic and diplomatic considerations took precedence over any potential happiness that they might have enjoyed in the arrangements, but in her defense, the Empress probably had no notion of what wedded bliss meant. She was, after all, married to a shameless philanderer who humiliated her with his numerous and less than discreet affairs. From his frequent flirtations with young dancers and opera singers of the Vienna stage to long-term liaisons with the ladies of the court, Emperor Francis was the ultimate adulterer. He was particularly enamored of the Princess Augsburg. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. Sorry, friends. A paramour 30 years his junior, the emperor makes no secret of his passion for her, one visitor to the Austrian court noted. Indeed, Francis and his mistress enjoyed frequent trysts in his hunting lodges, in his theater box at Vienna, in his cozy home he purchased for her. Even his somewhat sheltered children knew what was going on. The emperor is a very good hearted father, wrote his daughter Christina. One can always rely upon him as a friend, and we must do what we can to protect him from his weakness. I am referring to his conduct with the Princess Obsburg. Her mother, Christina continued, was very jealous of of this devotion. Well, yeah, I can't blame her. Despite her displeasure and the fact that she held all the power as the sovereign of both Austria and Hungary, the empress could do nothing to rein in her wayward husband. Instead, she became obsessed with controlling the moral conduct of her subjects. With its opulent theaters, grand opera houses, and an up and coming talent by the name of Mozart, the glittering city of Vienna was a cosmopolitan mecca in the midst of a cultural wasteland. It was a city of free adultery, as one visitor put it, and it was here that Emperor Francis's lifestyle thrived. Transferring her anger to her husband's betrayals, Maria Theresa established her chastity commission. Ugh, this doesn't sound good. A special department of the police charged with suppressing vice. The purity patrols were everywhere, infiltrating theaters, social gatherings, and even private homes. Anyone suspected of being less than upright was arrested, while foreigners accused of corrupting the local citizenry were banished from the kingdom. Some said the betrayed empress herself played a part in the commission, disguising herself and roaming Vienna in search of her wayward man. I wonder what that was like, or if that was true. The unusual punishment for those convicted of moral violations was harsh and meant to serve as an example to others. Oh my God. The violators were chained to stone pillars at the city gates, where they sat in their own filth, sometimes for weeks and months, completely dependent on the kindness of strangers for food and drink. The punishments, however, backfired. Instead of being ridiculed and scorned, the chained souls became heroes of sorts. The citizens of Vienna fed and catered to them, all while laughing at the prudish empress with her unfaithful husband. When she wasn't storming the bedrooms of her people, Maria Theresa busied herself inflicting marriage on her helpless children. Like many royal offspring, they were to be used as political capital, helping to strengthen her parents' position throughout arranged matrimony. This was a particularly rich ancient tradition in Empresses Habsburg's family line. Crown Prince Joseph, heir to the throne, was given top priority in the marriage market. Luckily for him, he actually fell in love with the mate chosen for him, Princess Isabella of Parma. Unfortunately, Isabella's affections were directed elsewhere. She had a major crush on Joseph's sister, Christina. I am told that the day begins with God, Isabella gushed to Christina in a letter. I, however, begin the day by thinking of the object of my love, for I think of her incessantly. Oh, that's sweet. Empress Maria Theresa would have never tolerated a lesbian relationship between her daughter and her daughter in law, but the issue became moot when Isabella suddenly died of smallpox at age 21. The prince was devastated by his loss, but his mother, ever conscious of dynastic priorities, quickly married him off again. Joseph was given a choice of two brides, neither of whom stirred much desire in him. I prefer not to marry either, he announced to his mother, but since you are holding a knife to my throat, I will take Princess Josepha of Bavaria because, from what I hear, she at least has fine breasts. Oh, good Lord. Nice, nice. Uh, Josepha's breasts at last were a disappointment along with the rest of her. She happened to be short and thick set, with festering sores all over her body and bad teeth. Joseph was repulsed by his bride and avoided her at all cost. They want me to have children, he wrote despondently. How can we have them? If I could put the tip of my finger on the tiniest part of her body which was not covered in pimples, I would try to have children. Oh. Poor Josepha, abandoned and humiliated, suddenly died of smallpox like her predecessor, though this time her husband was not particularly moved by grief. How sad. Yeah, and another one of her kids had phimosis, that same issue that Peter the Third had. Oh, thank you so much, Kathleen. Continuing your membership. I appreciate all y'all being here. Okay, let me see here. Now we're back in England talking about Henry VIII, the eighth's daughter, Bloody Mary. It says, whenever it came right down to it, Henry VIII was no better a father than he was husband. Each of the king's children was bruised to some degree by his overwhelming personality, but Mary, his eldest daughter by Catherine of Aragon, was absolutely battered by it. For more than 3 decades, the sad princess endured being alternately doted upon, terrorized, and regarded with devastating indifference by her father until he finally died and left her alone. Mary Tudor's birth in 1516 was greeted with little enthusiasm by her dad, other than his belief that it boded well for the eventual arrival of vastly preferable male children. If it was a daughter this time, by the grace of God, sons will follow, the disappointed but hopeful monarch remarked soon after Mary was delivered. The little princess was raised amidst all the trappings of royalty, but away from her parents, as was customary at the time. When he did see her, Henry occasionally showed delight in his daughter's developing musical skills and obvious intelligence. Though he called her his chiefest pearl, this was not so much out of any abounding love. Rather, it was his recognition that Mary was a valuable commodity in the European marriage market. Before she turned 12, in fact, she had been variously betrothed to the Dauphin of France, her younger brother, and her Habsburg cousin, and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Good Lord. Oh, thank you so much, Panda. Stephanie, appreciate that. Yeah, they called her Bloody Mary, Kathleen, because of all the beheadings that she did, the executions. Despite her father's appreciation of her worth, Mary nevertheless remained an only child and a girl. For the king, who was determined to secure the Tudor dynasty with sons, this was simply unacceptable. She was not yet 12 when Henry revealed his conviction that his marriage to Catherine had been invalid from the beginning. The princess was in store for a hideous adolescence as her parents' marriage unraveled before her. Queen Catherine's stubborn insistence that she was the king's true and lawful wife enraged Henry, and Mary was forced to watch as her mother was degraded 100 different ways and in her father's efforts to shed her. One of his cruelest weapons was setting Catherine up in a household close to Mary's, but only allowing mother and daughter to meet for the briefest of moments. And though Henry still occasionally showed Mary some affection, there was no disguising the fact that his split with Catherine and the invalidation of their marriage would automatically make her a B word bastard, is what it says. When King Henry eventually defied Rome and married Anne Boleyn, Mary acquired one of history's meanest stepmothers. That, in addition to an increasingly remote and hostile father, I look up to check comments and I lose my place, friends. uh, where was I? There we are. The new queen loathed the girl, mostly because Mary represented a threat to any children she might have with the king. Anne was incensed when the loyal people affectionately cheered for Mary at her coronation. As much rejoicing went on as if God Almighty had come down from heaven, Anne bitterly complained. She later threatened to install Mary as one of her servile maids, and then used the opportunity to perhaps give her too much dinner on some occasion, that is, poison her, or marry her to some valet. The exiled Catherine heard of Anne's threats and sent Mary a letter of warning when she heard the new queen was pregnant. Daughter, she wrote, I heard such tidings this day that I do perceive, if to be true, the time is very near when Almighty God will provide for you. Having seen firsthand how cruel her former husband and his new wife could be, Catherine was convinced that Henry would acquiesce to any demand Anne might make for Mary's death. Believing this could be the last letter to her daughter might ever receive from her, Catherine encouraged bravery in the face of possible murder and concluded with an outpouring of maternal love. I would to God, good daughter, that you did know how good a heart I write this letter unto you. I never did write one with a better. As it turned out, Mary did survive the birth of her half sister, the future Queen Elizabeth I, but her troubles were far from over. The Act of Succession, passed by Parliament in 1534, gave all rights to the throne to Anne Boleyn's children, excluding Mary entirely, now that she was no longer a princess, but an official bastard. I hate saying that word. It's how it's written here. Yeah, that Henry was absolutely horrible. Horrible, horrible. He's the same one who killed most of the wives. Um, Mary was ordered to move into baby Elizabeth's household and act as her servant. The command from the king, addressed to the Lady Mary, the king's daughter, provoked a brave response to the diminished title. I could not a little marvel at the letter Mary wrote to her father. Trusting verily that your grace does take for me your lawful daughter born in true matrimony, she signed it, your most humble daughter, Mary, Princess. The young woman, now almost 18, had learned much from her mother's situation and her courage. Though she avowed herself to be obedient to her father in anything he might demand of her, she would never betray her conscience or compromise her rights by acknowledging that she was not the king's legitimate heir. Henry, on the other hand, resented his daughter's defiance as much as he did Catherine's, and went out of his way to make Mary's life miserable as long as she refused to bend to his will and accept her reduced status. After all the people who had cared for her growing up were sent away, Mary was given one of the smallest rooms in Elizabeth's household. There was only one princess now, and she was Anne Boleyn's daughter. Whenever the baby traveled in her velvet litter, Mary was forced to walk beside her in the mud. At dinner, Elizabeth was given the chair of honor, while Mary had to sit with the lower ranks. Any servant who showed her the slightest bit of compassion was sent away. Those suspected of encouraging her pretenses as the true princess were locked away in the tower. And perhaps worst of all, Anne Boleyn's aunt was put in charge of Mary and given license to persecute her in any way she liked. Because Mary had been advised to always assert her rights as Henry's true heir, lest they be compromised by neglect or acquiescence, she had to object every time she was called Lady Mary or Elizabeth was called Princess. This brought constant punishment on her. First, her jewels and fine clothes were taken away, in time, by nearly everything else she owned, followed by nearly everything else she owned. When she sent a message to her father advising him of her destitution, Mary ordered the messenger to accept any money or clothing that was offered, but not to accept any writing in which she was not titled princess. Henry VIII, Harry thinks he had a bad time as a spare. Mary was actually the firstborn, the heir, and had to be actually literally abused and made, to be a spare. Exactly, Stacia. We all know what happened to Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII did occasionally visit the household, but it was always to see Elizabeth. Mary was locked away in her room every time he came. There was one occasion, however, when the king did give his daughter a small taste of the affection he once had for her. She had sent word to the king begging for his permission to see him and kiss his hand. She was refused, but slipped away to the roof terrace to watch him leave. Looking up, Henry noticed her. She was kneeling with her hands clasped together in supplication. Nodding, he touched his hat to her and rode away. The simple but tantalizing gesture would be the last Mary would receive in a long time. A campaign of terror was about to begin. Let's see. They go over the part where Anne Boleyn is beheaded and he marries Jane Seymour. And it says Mary's fortunes now began to improve just a bit. Henry's new wife, Jane Seymour, encouraged the king to reconcile with his daughter and bring her to court. While Mary wrote her father loving letters of humility and obedience, the king's counselor, Thomas Cromwell, dictated that the words that she hoped would save her life and restore her to some level of favor. In as humble and lowly a manner as it is possible for a child to use to her father and sovereign lord, one letter began, Mary acknowledged all of her faults and offenses, sought forgiveness, and professed herself to be as sorry as any creature living for defying him. She asked for his fatherly pity on her frail sex, noting that I am but a woman and your child. Another letter begged Henry to envision her most humbly prostrate before your noble feet, your most obedient subject and humble child. And that annoys me not at Mary writing it, but that she literally felt like she had to write him like that to probably save her life because she just saw Anne Boleyn be executed, you know? But yeah, the Mary story is wild. I'm only halfway through the stories I wanted to share, but I'll probably have to wind down in about 20, 30 minutes. I'm getting kind of hungry. Right, Stacia? Yeah, that's the way that she put it to her dad. I like that one too, Joy. Agree completely, Stacia. I'm going to take a break for just a minute here and turn the camera off, but I'm still right here. Then we'll read a few more stories. Let me see, what is the next one? Next one's about Queen Victoria and how she really hated one of her sons. Like, it is crazy. She didn't like her kids very much at all. And then after that, oh, I agree, Jelly. Definitely a whiner. Let's see, there's Thomas à Becket in that story. Yeah, some of these are pretty wild when it gets to stories about like Claudius and Nero. Oh my God, Station, no, I can't. Ugh. Right, Kung Fu? Man, the last queen, like I said, she made mistakes, but she did a really good job of not, being absolutely horrendous like she could have been, like her predecessors. Right, Diet? I agree, Jelly. Agree completely. Let's see. Let me find one more to read here. Okay, here's one about a pope. It says, unlike Leo, Paul the Fourth wasn't about to sit around the Vatican pleasuring himself while kings and commoners alike gave Rome the collective finger. Elected at age 79, this vile-tempered, foul-mouthed vicar of Christ was probably too old and way too mean to enjoy himself in that way. Oh, yeah, exactly, Stacia. Yeah. Paul started with a little house cleaning. He was so disgusted by the nudes Michelangelo had created in the Sistine Chapel that he ordered swaths of clothes painted on them. The artist who completed this task, Daniel de Volterra, became known as the breeches maker. In his fury at the Reformation that was sweeping Christendom, Paul reignited the fires of the Roman Inquisition. Often presiding over heresy trials himself, the Pope dared anyone to challenge him under his authority. Even Ignatius Loyola, a great soldier turned saint, trembled in every bone at the thought of crossing Paul. In his drive to maintain orthodoxy, the Pope created the Index of Forbidden Books, a landmark in thought control that would linger well into the 20th century. Among the first entries are the works of the Dutch scholar Erasmus and all Bibles not written in Latin. In time, authors added to the list would include everyone from Galileo, who was persecuted by Pope Urban VIII in the next century for not daring to suggest that the earth revolved around the sun and not the other way around. As much as Paul IV hated dissent, though, he hated the Jewish people even more. While the papacy had never been a model of tolerance, cursing the Jews for having killed Christ, Paul took to persecuting them with an unprecedented ferocity. In the preview of Nazi policy still almost 400 years away, he herded all the Jews of Rome into ghettos and forced them to sell their property to Christians at ridiculously low prices. He also ordered them to wear distinctive yellow headgear and forbade them to marry Christians or attend to them as physicians. What the hell? Jewish synagogues were destroyed and sacred texts burned. And though he was the most despised pope of the century, upon his death in 5059, joyful crowds rampaged through Rome, smashing his statues. Pope Paul IV's legacy of intolerance lingered for centuries. It took a far greater pope in the 20th century to begin to atone for all the hatred and injustice that had been sworn. The mark of Cain is stamped upon our foreheads, the gentle and beloved Pope John uh, the 23rd wrote in prayer. Across the centuries, our brother Abel has lain in blood which we drew and shed tears we caused by forgetting thy love. Forgive us, Lord, for the curse we falsely attributed to their name as Jews. Forgive us for crucifying thee a second time in their flesh, for we knew not what we did. Well, that's a nice prayer. Hey, Art, good to see you. Unfortunately, I'll be winding down pretty soon, but I'm glad you managed to pop in. If you want to be included in the drawing, just say that you want to in the chat. Let's see. I had one more. Oh, this is the Pope Leo that they were just talking about that came before. Well, maybe two more, because there was one that came right before him that was interesting too. Okay. The rebirth of culture and learning that was sweeping Europe in the 15th century was not entirely lost on the papacy. It's just that many popes found it difficult to completely let go of the Dark Ages. Sixtus IV, for example, commissioned the magnificent Sistine Chapel right around the time he gave his blessing to the Spanish Inquisition and anointed the murderous Torquemada to run it. His nephew, Julius II, patronized Michelangelo and Raphael when he wasn't dressed in full armor slaughtering his enemies. Now let's see who has the bigger balls. Julius once hollered on the battlefield, the King of France or the Pope? What the hell? Oh my gosh. Innocent VIII seemed poised to modernize the papacy when he became the first pontiff to openly acknowledge his illegitimate children. Before he came along, papal illegitimate children were always euphemistically referred to as nephews. Any promise Innocent may have shown as a modern son of the Renaissance, however, was quickly extinguished when he gave his seal of approval to what may have been the most destructive book in history, his papal bull entitled the Summaris Desiderantes Affectibus, and gave new life to the persecution of witches and served as the preface to the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Witch's Hammer, a handbook for the discovery and punishment of witches written by two of the church's most ruthless inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Johann Sprenger. Yeah, a lot of, very rural country women, some men, but women especially, who weren't doing any more than practicing herbal medicine, got persecuted badly and some killed due to the Malleus Maleficarum. Men and women straying from Catholic faith have abandoned themselves to devils, incubi, and succubi, Innocent wrote, and their incantations, spells, and conjurations and other cursed offenses have slain infants yet in the mother's womb. They hinder men from performing the sexual act and women from conceiving, whence husbands cannot know their wives, nor wives receive their husbands. If it hadn't been used for centuries to come as a key instrument in torture and the burning of thousands, The witch's hammer might have gone down in history as one of the more laughable studies in stupidity. A memorable passage from the book concerns a venerable father from the Dominican house of Spires, well known for the honesty of his life and for his learning. One day, the priest says, while I was hearing confessions, a young man came to me, and in the course of his confession, woefully said that he had lost his member. I'm sure y'all know what he was referring to. His member. Being astonished at this and not willing to give it an easy credence, since in the opinion of the wise it is the mark of lightheartedness to believe too easily, I obtained proof of it when I saw nothing on the young man's removing his clothes and showing the place. Then, using the wisest counsel, I asked whether he suspected anyone of having so bewitched him. And the young man said that he did suspect someone, but that she was absent and living in worms. Then I said, I advise you to go to her as soon as possible and try your utmost to soften her with gentle words and promises. And he did so, for he came back after a few days and thanked me, saying that he was whole and had recovered everything. And I believed his words, but again proved them by evidence of my eyes. Yeah, that was a thing they were saying at the time of the Malleus Maleficaris, was that witches stole men's penises. And they meant that literally and physically. They said that the witches kept them for pets. Isn't that hilarious? Right, Kathleen? After his zealous advocacy of witch hunting, Innocent the Eighth must have had a moment of clarity at the end of his life, perhaps realizing all the misery and harm he had caused with it. As he lay dying in 1492, the Pope reportedly prayed that a better man than he would succeed him. Alas, the prayer went unanswered as Rodrigo Borgia charged his way to the throne. If any of you saw, I think it was, I can't remember if it was HBO or Showtime, did a drama about the Borgias, and there's a lot of truth, there's a lot of, dramatic license taken, but they are wild. Yeah, Lorena Bobbitt, she was later. Yes, that was an actual belief that the witch hunters of the Inquisitions had at that time, that witches kept men's members after they stole them literally and physically as pets. Oh my God, so funny. Well, I think that is all I can manage for today, friends. We've been on here for a couple hours. Thank you all so much for being here with me. I really appreciate it. Like I said, any of you haven't already who want to be in the drawing, just say so in the chat before we go out. You're good, Stacia. That's so funny. But again, thank you all so much for hanging out with me today. I really appreciate it. And we will do another book live soon. I'm starting to feel a little better. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you soon. Bye, y'all.